Aunt, Lara, Aaron, Minna, Blair, Jean, Roy, and Heidi, and Eric and Josh. I think I shall go back a little bit and reminisce about my childhood in Berlin, Germany. As you all know, I was born in 1920. That was after the First World War. And Tante Lotte and Tante Muller were born before the World War. And Opa had to go to war, so when he came back, I was born. And I lived in Berlin until I was 13 and a half years old. And then Oma and Tante Muller and I, we immigrated to the United States, to Washington, D.C. And we lived, our first house that we lived in was at 615 I Street Northeast. I grew up in Berlin, and I was born in the same apartment where I lived until I was 13 and a half years old. I remember when I first started to go to school, we had, it was called a Zuckertüte, that was a cone-shaped, like a cone-shaped bag, and it was filled with all goodies, with candy and such things, and I think there were some toys in there too. And every child that started going to school got one of those, and I remember that it was almost as big as I was, and I carried that from school to home, and then we had a good time eating everything that was in that bag. Then when I remember we had some very good neighbors. We were living on the second floor of the apartment house, and on the first floor was a family who had two boys. One was older than I was, and the other was a little bit younger than I was. And on the third floor above us was Frau Maas and her son Walter, and she was a widow, and she ran a taxi service. The people that lived below us, their name was Fine, and the boy that was younger than I was, his name was Colton. I can't remember what the other boy's name was, but he had had polio, and he couldn't walk too well, but he could ride the bicycle, so he rode his bicycle wherever he went. I know we lived on the first courtyard, and then you went through the building, and then you came to the second courtyard. And one of my aunts and uncle lived there. It was Tante Anna and Uncle Albert, and she was Opa's sister. They didn't have any children, but I used to go over to Tante Anna, and I had a good time with her. And I remember when I was little, I don't know how old I was, but they always had the butter standing on the middle of the table, or the kitchen table, and I always put my little finger in there and took a little bit of butter out, and she was always wondering who did that, until she caught me one time, and she just laughed and laughed, and she said I shouldn't do that anymore, so I didn't. And then when I was a little bit older, I remember that I always wanted to earn a little bit of money, but nobody had much money, so she told me that I could darn Uncle Albert's socks. So I did, and she gave me 5 Pfennig, that's almost like a nickel here, and for each pair of socks that I darned, and some of them, I remember they had really a lot of holes in it, but I did it. Then I remember across from us in the first courtyard, there was another house, and the windows faced each other, and one of my friends lived there, and then we used to go out on the street, on the sidewalk, and we used to play hopscotch, and then we used to play marbles, and but they were a little bit different than you play marbles here, and I can't remember too much anymore, but we all had a sack, a bag, and we had our marbles in there, and each marble counted something different, and then you had to try to get them in the hole, and if you got them all in, then they were yours. And I remember we used to spin tops on the street, on the where the cars were, but of course we didn't have too many cars, and there were quite a few kids that were playing that, and we were always trying to see who could get the farthest with with our tops. I think I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and I had blood poisoning in one of my fingers. It was the index finger on my right hand, and the blood, that went all the way up my arm. So my Oma took me to the doctor, and he packed it in, I don't know what kind of thing that he packed it in, and I couldn't get my dress on, so I had to walk home with my slip only, and I was very embarrassed. And then we went to school, and I had to face everybody, and Oma told the teacher that I couldn't come to school because when I got home, I had to lie on the couch and put my arm up so it would get better. And then, I don't know how long it was, I think it must have been a week or so. Then we went back to the doctor and everything was gone. And I was so glad. But there was a scab on my finger, and the doctor pulled that off, and I still remember that really hurt. But after that, then I got to be all right again. I think I was about 8 years old when my cousin Trude got married, and that was the first and only wedding that I went to when we were living in Germany. I know that Opa and Tante Lotte were still there, and they left in 1929 to come to the United States. And I had to memorize a poem for them. And there was another cousin there. He was about the same age as I was, and he was supposed to memorize another part. And he couldn't do it. He just broke down, and he cried, and so I had learned both of them. So I did both of the parts, and everybody clapped. I remember that. I also remember that before they got married, they called it Polterabend, and you go to the apartment or to the house, and you break all kinds of dishes and everything before the apartment door, and then the bride and the groom-to-be, they have to clean all that up, and that's Polterabend. I vaguely remember when Tante Lotte and Opa went to America, because I was only 9 years old, and I guess when you're 9 years old, you don't pay too much attention what happens. But I do remember that they left, and Tante Muller told me one time that Opa used to make caskets when we were living in Berlin. I never knew what he did. I know he was a cabinet maker, but outside of that, I didn't know. I know I wasn't baptized when I was a baby because Opa was very much against the church taxes that we had to pay to the state. So he refused to pay any more church taxes, so they excommunicated him from church, but Oma still went to church. And I was 6 years old, and it took Oma that long to convince Opa that I should be baptized. And I remember I walked down the aisle, and I was baptized. And then when we got home, they had a little party. And usually, when you were baptized or confirmed or were there, they had some musicians, about 3 of them, that came to your house, and they played in front of your apartment and in front of your apartment door, and you gave them some money. So this Hermann Fein, I just remembered his name, he was a boy that was a little bit older than I was, who lived downstairs from us. He saw them coming because we were outside the apartment house, and he said, "Oh, they're the drunks that are coming. Let's run away." So he went on his bike, and I went with him. And I remember Oma and Opa, they were looking for me, and finally we did get home. And I didn't get a spanking, but I was very much reprimanded that I shouldn't have done that, and I shouldn't have listened to Hermann, and I should have come upstairs. Well, I didn't, but then finally they consoled themselves, and I was okay, and they were okay. about 6 or 7 blocks away from where we used to live in Berlin, they had like an amusement park. I think it was something like Glen Echo. And they always had wrestlers there in the arena. And Opa liked to go to the wrestling matches. And I must have been maybe 8 years old or so, and he used to take me along sometimes. And I still remember they were all bald-headed, and I had the biggest kick. And then when Oma found out, oh boy, she light into Opa. So he wouldn't take me anymore, and I was really very disappointed. When Opa and Tante Lotte came over here to America, they were not going to stay over here. They were just going to make some money and come back to Germany. And but everything just didn't work out that way. After they left and came over here, that was I think it was in March 1929, then Oma and Tante Muller and I, we were living by ourselves then. And Opa used to send us money every week. I think it was $10 every week. And from that, and at that time you used to get 4 mark to the dollar. And we lived on that. Tante Muller was working at the time too, and she was working in an office, and I think she was a bookkeeper. And I was still going to school, and Oma stayed home. Outside of Berlin, we used to have a garden, and Oma and I, we walked up there every other day to water everything. We had a lot of vegetables and flowers, and so we always had to walk up there. And I think it took us a good half an hour, 45 minutes. And then in the summertime, we used to have 6 weeks vacation from school. And when you walked a little bit further out towards another place, after we got to our garden, then they had a swimming. It was a swimming pool outside, and I forget how much we had to pay. It wasn't very much that I had to pay. And I walked up there whenever we went to the garden. I walked up there, and then I walked back again. I remember we did a lot of walking over there, and because we didn't have much money, and wherever we went, we just had to walk. We had quite a few relatives over there too in Berlin, and whoever birthday it was, we used to go to their birthdays and celebrate their birthdays, and we walked. Usually Oma and I, we usually went wherever. And then I had another aunt that lived about a block away from us, and that was Tante Anna and Uncle Max. And this Tante Anna was Oma's sister. And we used to walk over there quite a bit and spend some time with them. And they were the caretakers of that apartment house. And it was a funeral parlor connected with that house. I remember Uncle Max used to help with the funerals, and they still had horse-drawn carriages at one time when they had a funeral, and they put the casket on the carriage, and then he had to sit there, and he helped with the horses. And then, of course, Tante Ellie and Uncle August, who were over here in America, I think they came over in 1926. They used to live about 5 or 6 blocks from us. So we had relatives right close together with us, and that was really nice. Most of what I'm going to talk about now is after Opa left to go to America. Oma and I, we used to deliver a weekly magazine. It was called Die Hausfrau, that means a homemaker, to, I forgot how many apartment houses we had. And once a month we had to collect the money for that. And one time I went upstairs to this one apartment, and I heard some other people come in, and I thought it was gypsies, because they had quite a few gypsies over there in Berlin at that time. And they were known to rob people and take money and all that. And I had a pair of underpants on that had elastic around the legs, and I stuck the money in my underpants there. Of course, then when I saw them come up, it was some people that lived in that apartment house, but I was really scared. We used to go for walks in the woods because over in Berlin, they keep the walks and they keep the woods real clean. They have special foresters that take care of the forests. And there was Trude and Erich, and then Tante Anna and Uncle Max and a friend of theirs, and then Oma and Tante Mulle and I. We used to go for walks, and we took our lunch along, and then we stopped and ate our lunch. And one time I remember I was always a scapegoat because I was the youngest one. And there was a sign there, and it said, Gute Menschen zertreten keine Pflanzen. That means good people don't step on any plants. And I read, Gute Menschen zertreten kleine Pflanzen. That's KL. That means I read, good people step on little plants. Of course, everybody just howled and laughed. And I think I didn't live that down for a long, long time. Then another thing too, once a week we used to go, it was like a restaurant or bar, and that was just about a block away from us. And every Friday night we used to go over there, and we used to visit with, of course, always the same people, Uncle Max and Tante Anna and Trude and Erich and Ille, that was the friend's name. And they used to have some beer, and I always had to go along because Oma didn't have any place where to leave me, and I could have a malt beer. That means that it didn't have any alcohol or anything in it. It was just, I think it was almost like root beer here. And we could sit there all evening at this one table, and they just had one beer, and we visited, I remember, for a long, long time. And then, of course, when I went to school, I went to grade school, and then when I was 10 years old, I went to high school, and you used to go to the grade school for 4 years, and then you went to high school for 6 years. But then some people couldn't afford to go to high school because you had to pay tuition for that, and it was 10 mark a month. And if you didn't go to high school, then you kept going to the grade school until the 8th grade. And when I started to go to high school, I had to walk for about, I would say a good half hour to get to school, because over there you don't have any buses, school buses or anything. At least at that time they didn't have any. And I had to go through a park, was called Stadtpark, and then I got to the school, and it was only, they used to have just the girls' school, and then just the school for boys was about a block away from where the girls' school was. And you went to school 6 days a week, and school started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you went until 12:30, and sometimes if you had 1 o'clock, you went from 8 until 1, and you had a recess in between for 15 minutes where you could eat your lunch, and then sometimes you had to go back in the afternoon from 2 to 4. If you had to do that, you only had to go from 8 to 12 in the morning, and then you went from 2 to 4, and usually from 2 to 4 you had when you went from 2 to 4, you usually had art in the afternoon, like painting and drawing and things like that, or phys ed, and that was the only 2 subjects that you had in the afternoon. And on Saturdays, you went from 8 until 12. So it was a full schedule that you had, and you always had homework. You always had to bring your homework home, and you couldn't do any homework. You didn't have any study periods in between. And when I went to high school, we had, and you always had religion. You had to take that in public school, And we usually had it the first period or the last period because there were some Jewish people there, and they didn't have to take the religion, but most of the people in Berlin were Protestant Lutherans, so you had to take religion. One time our school went to a competition that was in a big playing field, I forget the name of it, and for gymnastics competition, and we had the letter M on our jerseys, and of course that meant Mittelschule, and there were some boys around there that had another letter, and they wanted to know what school we were from, so we told them we were Mickey Mouse, and they all laughed. I don't think that we won anything at that time, but it was a lot of fun, and they always tried to do everything for the kids. When I was in high school, we also learned to knit and to crochet and to darn socks and to patch your clothes, and it had to be just so, and if we didn't do it right, then the teacher came along and she just ripped it all out. The first thing when we started to knit, we had to knit a pair of socks, and that came in handy. I had a hard time trying to turn the heel, but those socks came in handy because in the wintertime I always went ice skating, and the way they did that over there, the tennis courts, they put water on there. They hosed them all down in the wintertime, and then the water froze on the tennis courts, and then you can ice skate on there in the winter, and in the summer they played tennis on it. One time I remember I walked to one of the courts, and that was cheaper than the others, and that was about, I would say about 6-7 blocks away from where we lived. And when I got there, there was a big sign on there, and it said it's closed because it was too cold. So I had to walk all the way back home again, but that didn't bother me any. We used to live in one big room. It was called a Berliner Zimmer. That means a Berliner room, and that was real big. Well, Anita and Joan and Raymond saw it. And in the front there was a kitchen, and then that was that big room, and in the back we used to sleep, and in the front there we had our like a dining room like, and it was kind of crowded, but I mean we did the best we could. Then of course at Christmas we had the Christmas tree in the front there by the dining room, and sometimes I could persuade Oma to leave the Christmas tree up until my birthday, which was the 10th. And sometimes Benno, Joan and Anita met him too when we were over in Germany. His birthday is the 11th of January, so sometimes he persuaded Oma for me to stay up until his birthday came around, and then so we could wish him happy birthday. About 10 minutes after midnight or so, and then I had to go to bed because I had to go back to school the next day. But he used to be a lot of fun. And after Opa came over here, I remember the first time we ever saw a jigsaw puzzle. He sent a jigsaw puzzle over to us, and so of course we got the neighbors together, and nobody knew what it was or what you do with it, and then finally we figured it out that we have to put all the pieces together, and we had all the pieces together, and there was one piece missing. And guess who had that? Valdemars, our neighbor from upstairs. He had taken one piece out at the beginning, and he said he was waiting for it so he can put the last piece in by himself. Another thing that Opa used to send over was the Camel cigarettes. They were so popular over there, and he used to send some packages over, not too many, but we used to give it to Valdemars because I think he was the only one that smoked from our, then when I got, I think I must have been 10 years old or so, and Oma thought that I was looking too pale, so she sent me to Opa's father, who lived in Czarno, Pommern. This is Poland now, and it was on the Baltic Sea, and Uncle Fritz and Tante Charlotte, they lived there too, and then I stayed with my grandfather and his two daughters, Tante Minna and Tante Bertha, and their son, and Tante Bertha's son, Moxie, and it was an apartment. I remember it was upstairs, and they taught me a lot of card games, and we played cards most of the time. Sometimes Uncle Fritz took me along because he used to run a tour bus, and he used to take people along the Baltic Sea and show them all the points of interest and everything, and that was really a big thrill for me when he took me along there. And we used to eat a lot of fish, a lot of herring, because that's right there where they used to catch everything, and they were real fresh. And then when I got back home, I know I had to go on the train. When I got back home, and Oma got me, and she looked at me, and I didn't look any better than when I left, and she was kind of upset about that. But there was nothing she could do about it. I don't remember the card games anymore, but I had a good time up there. I must have been, I think, 11 or 12 years old, and I had seen a doll in one of the big department stores, and I think it cost 35 or 40 marks. And I had told Oma about it, and she said, well, we didn't have any money. But then at Christmas, she did get me the doll, and oh, I was so thrilled with that doll. Then Walter Maas had a girlfriend, and she could sew really well. So she sewed a lot of clothes for the doll, and I crocheted some dresses and a sweater, I think, for the doll too, and I still had it when we came over here. But now, I don't know who has it. I don't have it anymore. One New Year's Eve, I think it was the last New Year's Eve that we were over there, we went over to Tante Anna and Uncle Max, and they had a New Year's Eve party, and at that time they always, at midnight, everybody goes out and they have these noisemakers and they all holler and everything, and they were all feeling kind of good, and Tante Anna had a big kitchen and there was a linoleum floor, so she poured some water over the floor, and then they were sliding up and down the floor because they thought they were going skating. And when we went home then, Oma was so worried about Tante Muller, she didn't want her to go anyplace, but when we went home, we stopped at Fine's downstairs, and Tante Muller slipped away, and she went back to Tante Anna and Uncle Albert, and she had a good time back there, but then finally she did come back. And one time, I don't remember how old I was. I must have been 10, I guess 10 or 11, and we had been back to Tante Anna visiting, and we came back home, and our apartment had been robbed, and they had taken everything, all our bedclothes, all our bed, and you know, you have feather beds over there, and our winter, it was in the winter time, our winter clothes, our winter coats, and everything, and so we didn't have any place to go, so we went over to Tante Anna and Uncle Max, and they put us up, and then it took I remember it took quite a while for Oma to get everything back. We didn't get anything back, but to get some money back from the insurance company, and that was something else again. But one thing, they had just changed the dollar bills from, they used to be real long and big, to the bills we have now. And Oma had $20 on one of the tables there in the dining room, and they didn't take that because I think they didn't know that that was dollars. When I was in high school there, we had to go on trips, on field trips once a month, and one of the teachers had to go with us. And I remember that. Oh, another thing too, the homeroom teacher I had when I was in high school was the same that Tante Lotte had. And the English teacher I had was the same like Tante Muller had. So, I mean, I came along 9 years afterwards, but still the same teachers were still there. And instead of like you do up here, you change from class to class, the kids used to stay in the same class, in the same classroom, but then the teachers used to come to you. Whenever we went on a field trip, one of the kids had to write the field trip up, and we got graded on that too. And then, of course, what I remember most vividly is, when I was in high school there, we took swimming lessons too, and they had a big swimming pool in Berlin, and it wasn't too far. We used to, well, of course, we always had to walk, and one time I remember I took 2 swimming tests. One was for 15 minutes, and you only had to swim the breaststroke for 15 minutes. I did that. And then another time, I didn't tell Oma about that, but she found out later on, you had to swim for 45 minutes. You could use any stroke you wanted to. You couldn't tread water, and you couldn't just lie on your back. But you had to swim the side stroke, the breaststroke, the backstroke, whatever you wanted, the dog paddle, but you had to keep moving. And I did that. And I had that certificate, but I don't have it anymore. I don't know where it ended up.